Hello again. Second video today. So I'm excited for this video because it's a conversation I was having with a friend of mine about fear. Actually, started with fear, and then basically one thing led to another, and the way I keep speaking kind of like explored. So, all right, fear, and the comment here is weeds in our garden. Uh, okay, so I explained fear like weeds. Why? Because weeds are tricky. We know those small grass that grow around our small, our veggies, uh, plants. When you're planting peppers, it's a shrub maybe, or a bush. It's like one of those things. It's funny because like they exist in all soil. They exist. I think the wind also like floats their seeds around. It's kind of like they're waiting for somebody to show love to a spot of soil, and then suddenly, pop, they start coming out. Uh, I love this. So I want you all to imagine with me a garden, and this is basically where you plant whatever the fuck you want. You can plant trees, you can plant shrubs, you can plant fruit trees, you can plant vines, you can even just leave it the way it is as grass and let people come and just plant whatever the fuck they want with it. You get to decide. But if this garden was to be planted by you, you're going to have to kind of like make room for certain things. And whatever you plant requires space in the soil for their roots to grow and space under the sun for the sun to shine. Keep in mind, some things need sun directly from day one. Other things maybe need some shade until they're like a certain size. And I think as I progress with this conversation, with this elaboration, you'll be able to maybe see a different kind of like something else happening. And I'm going to try my best to kind of bring out the most out of this conversation. But whatever you plant needs its own space, needs a good position. Because if you plant, for example, a tree that requires a lot of sun in the shade, it's not going to fruit. It's not going to bear anything. Even if it's just grow, it's going to take its time growing. It's going to be super slow until it finds the sun, and then it gets excited. And if you plant it in land that's not really good land, and if you plant it in a place where there's just a whole lot of roots around it, even though it's exposed to the sun, its roots can't actually go and find like nutritional soil, then it won't grow. There are a lot of things that we have to tend anytime we're planting something in our garden. And then one thing we have to always keep our eyes open are for weeds. Now, again, weeds are tricky, and it's because they're resilient. Weeds, it's not a learning thing. It's their existence is literally just I grow some roots, I see the sun, I bear fruit. To take care of weeds and to manage weeds, you have to pull them all out with their entire rooting system from the ground. Because the actual, I don't know what they call it, the stub where everything is connected, because there's a part where everything is connected in every plant. There's a part where everything's connected to the ground and everything, and the rest is connected up. But the actual trunk. And almost all plants, if you cut them or if you break them, there's a certain level above ground that if you don't break that part, it will regrow. Weeds are faster and stronger at regrowing. On top of all of that, they develop more roots in order to protect themselves the next time they break so they can recuperate faster. So the thing about weeds is if you run and you see some weeds growing and you break them too soon, what will happen? You're going to basically only break the top. They're going to develop thicker roots instead of the normal roots they have so that they could actually grow back up again. On the other side, if you wait too long to break the weeds or to pull the weeds from their ground, because normally when you're pulling the weeds, if the actual stem is still kind of like fragile and young, it'll break and you won't be able to remove their roots. You're gonna have to wait for them to grow back up and get thick and like strong. But every single time that happens, their roots kind of become thicker and thicker and thicker. And as their roots get to become thicker, they kind of congest the soil and they condense it and they grab onto it so that nothing kind of like now they do good in the garden, but fuck that for now. Let's continue. But if the weeds grow a day older than they're supposed to, then the seeds would actually open up and you're fucked. Because even when you remove this weed, its children are all around waiting for the time they could grow back again. So there's that sweet spot. And it's one of those Buddhistic like approaches. And when Buddha talks about like nirvana as the state between the guitar string being too overtuned and undertuned. I don't know if these are the actual methods. I'm sorry, man. I play guitar, so I should know better. But when you tune the guitar string a bit too much, it kind of has that pitching sound. It doesn't really sound the notes. And if you undertune it, it kind of like sounds right, like it's not really like hitting anything. And the same, it's like for weeds, they kind of have that small sweet spot where you can go, grab them, and they literally go out from the soil, and there's a lot of soil on top of them. And the minute you take the soil out and you shake it, everything falls. You get the beautiful weed with its roots ready to die, removed from your garden. Let's think of this as a concept. The fact that everything in our garden is planted by us for a specific purpose. The flowers because I like the smell. The flowers because I like the smell. The orange tree because I love oranges. The watermelon because it's summer and it's in season. The avocado tree because it's rich in like fats and all the good stuff and nutrients, whatever. Every single thing technically should be planted by us and with our care. And what happens when the weeds come up? They're literally there to fuck with us. But the reality is we end up focusing more time on the weeds than it is on the things that we planted. And if we actually give attention to the weed too soon, we screw up everything else we planted. And if we give attention to the weed too late, then we're screwing everything in the future we could plant. It's literally that small space where our interference is needed and necessary. And that small space is when you kind of like, you're doing your thing, you're tending to your stuff, and you notice that the weed is strong enough for it to be pulled. And then you go and you pull it. It is literally a daily observation where you just like look at your garden, do what you have to do for the things that you planted. And then everything else, you look around, it's time for that, it's time for that, pop, 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 pop. Sorted, you fuck off, you come the next day. The sooner you give attention to the weeds, the worse it gets for your plants that are already planted. The later you give attention to the weeds, you're kind of creating the same problem and allowing it to propagate to the future. What if we consider fear the same way? Because let's face it, when does fear show up? Every single time you're starting something. It could be something new, it could be something old, it doesn't matter. It could be something you've done a million times before. If it's not fear, maybe it's doubt. Maybe it's a bit of something. And instead of focusing on what we're doing, what we end up doing is kind of like feeling the fear, and because it's real, it's right there, while everything else is we're working towards it. But if you consider fear as basically like symbolic to the weeds in our garden, then effectively what we'll be doing is we'll be focusing on the garden itself, on whatever we planted in the garden, because the minute you plant, then the weeds start growing around it. And as we focus on everything that we're doing and what we need and what we're giving attention to, the fear kind of like grows with it. But the time will come where you get to decide, Are you going to still allow it to grow or not? From the beginning, you didn't want it, but from the beginning, you couldn't let it go. You still don't understand what kind of weed it is. It's still too weak. It's not showing its true color. You don't know what kind of fear you're working with. Is it fear of failing? Is it fear of abandonment? Is it fear of anxiety? Is it fear of losing friends? Is it fear of success? Is it fear? Is it fear? Is it fear? You don't know what kind of weed it is. And ultimately, what you do is you kind of like interact with whatever you're doing, so that when the time comes and actually exposes, when the weeds are mature enough for you to understand what they are, you get to decide how to take them, how to remove them, and how to deal with them. But if we don't trust that we'll be able to figure out later on in the future, then ultimately all we're doing is wasting our energy on the young weeds, effectively poisoning our soil. Because then the roots keep growing and growing and growing and growing, and eventually our own tree, our own plant, our own whatever we planted will not have space to grow anymore. Other than the fact that we're not giving it its proper attention, we're removing from anything it could actually extract from. Weeds in our garden. Fucking love this video. Yay!